The following story has been brought to you by StoriesToInspire.org.
Right before Corona, literally a few days before March 2020, I was invited to go to Rostov on the Dan River in Russia. For the yahrzeit of the Rashab on Beis Nissen. It was 100th year, 1920, 2020, Tafresh Pei, Tafshin Pei. I needed to renew my passport. The problem is the flight was getting very close, and I needed the express passport service. So we have in Muncie somebody known as the passport lady, and I went for a visit. One night I called up, I need a passport express. Of course, like every Jew, I need it tonight. I had a few days, a week, whatever it was. No problem. Did the signatures, did whatever you have to do to make a passport, the pictures. The woman turns to me and says, I owe you a profound debt of gratitude. I said, why? She says, I live here in Muncie with my husband. We have a beautiful family. One boy, Shmuley, began struggling with Yiddishkeit very, very heavily. It was extremely difficult for us. Through unconventional means, he found another wonderful Jewish girl who grew up in Lakewood by the name of Rachel. And they befriended each other. And they developed this relationship. They really liked each other. Whatever I tried, my husband tried, wasn't successful. It seemed like he has left Yiddishkeit. They decided to get married. And they wanted a beautiful, big, extravagant Jewish wedding. Not a very wealthy family. And I thought to myself, this is going to be a wedding that is not going to adhere to the standards of most of our weddings in terms of dress, in terms of music, in terms of ambiance, in terms of people, in terms of environment. And I spoke to a few people, and my husband spoke to a few, and they all said the same thing. Why throw out $30,000 for a wedding that you don't approve of? For a wedding that you're embarrassed of. Your husband is a graduate of the Mir in Brooklyn, and a graduate of Ney Yisrael in Toronto, and a Talmud Chacham, and a Yid who goes through Shas. As I was in the house, he was finishing Psachim and Kiddushin together for the Siyam and Erev Pesach. 5-6 blot a day, a big Talmud Chacham. It's going to be a busha for you. It's going to be a busha for him, for you, for your family. Let them make a small wedding. You contribute the herring. Cost you $6.99 in Evergreen in Muncie. You want a $10.99, a $10.99. Better they want sponge cake, seltzer, you'll send some seltzer. They can invite their friends and do their disco music. $30,000 I have to spend. And this woman tells me, my husband and I looked at each other and say, no. We made a decision the first day, we're going to be close to Shmuley. And if this is the wedding he wants, this is the wedding we're going to pay for. With the money that we're going to have to find, like many weddings. And we're going to be there, and we're going to dance, and we're going to celebrate, and we're going to embrace these kids. And we're going to enjoy the wedding. Let the comments be whatever they are. And where did they want the wedding? In Lakewood. Not in Mount Clair. Not in the Philippines. Not in the Chabad House of San Francisco. But in Lakewood. In one of the big halls of Lakewood. And she paid $30,000 for the wedding. And it was a wedding. And people had what to say. And the music was not exactly V-I-D, V-I-D, V-I-D. It wasn't even, Faratsto. But they got married. It was a kosher wedding. And they danced and they enjoyed. And they're now on the way home. It's 1 o'clock in the morning, 1:30 in the morning, driving from Lakewood to Muncie. You ever do that drive after a wedding? Especially when you're the mother of the chassan and you're driving yourself and it's an hour and 45 minutes and it never ends and it's a boring drive, forgive me. We love Lakewood, we love Muncie, but it's a long drive and it's 2 o'clock in the morning and you're exhausted. And she turns to her husband and says, I have to say, I feel guilty. So many people made this comment that it was the wrong thing. It was giving a hechsher with $30,000 for nishkin Yiddish, nishkin Torah dike chasana, kama Yiddish chasana. I feel bad. Not just the waste of money, Was it the right decision? Did we give a hechsher for such a wedding? And she's like, I should be happy. My son got married tonight. But I'm not. I'm feeling down. So her husband, as a good husband, listens. You heard what I just said, or you weren't listening? He says, how can I be here for you? She says, I need a little therapy. He says, well, where are we going to get a therapist 2 o'clock in the morning? Who are we going to call? And she said, Rabbi YY. And she went to YouTube in the car, or whatever website she went to, and she typed in Rabbi YY Jacobson, and there I was driving with them from Lakewood to Muncie, 2:30 now in the morning. And she said, Rabbi YY, I kid you not, as we put it on, you speak to the crowd and you say, I want to share a story with you. And this is the story I shared that family heard that night driving back from their son's wedding. And the story I said, I heard from the person himself. I was standing at a funeral and there was an elderly Jew, almost 90 years old. His name was Rebbe David Edelman. He lived in Springfield, Massachusetts. Today he passed away already. And as we're waiting for the coffin, for the aron, I said, Rebbe David, tell me a story. We're standing right there on the street waiting for the aron. And he says, Rebbe Yosef Yitzchok, I'll tell you a story that I experienced. It was 1943, Tafshin Gimel. He says, me, David Eilman, and my chaver, whose name was Hirschel Fogelman, who was living at the time in Worcester, Massachusetts, Rabbi Yehuda Tzvi Fogelman. We were standing at the break in the afternoon. They were both Talmidim in the Tomchei Tmimim Lubavitch and the Lubavitch Yeshiva on 770 Eastern Parkway. 3 years after the previous Rebbe, the Rebbe Rats came to America, it was a little yeshiva, 770 Eastern Parkway, Tomchei Tmimim. It was break, 2 o'clock, 2:30. We were standing outside, if you know the building a little bit, by the elevator. Later, the Rebbe would stand there and give dollars. And we were standing and having a cigarette, it's 1943. And we were schmoozing what Bochum schmooze about 2 o'clock in the afternoon when you have a little break and you're smoking a cigarette. The door opens up, and who comes out? A Jew who was then known as the Ramash. Ramash is an acronym of Rebbe Menachem Schneerson, who later became the Lubavitcher Rebbe. At that time, he was known as the Ramash, the son-in-law of his father-in-law, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, the Rebbe Rayatz, the sixth Lubavitcher Rebbe, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. He comes out. They called Chassan of the Bein Nesiyah, the Edim, the son-in-law of the Rebbe. So, we greeted him cordially. And he looks at me and at my friend, and he says, in Yiddish, I'll translate, wilt hören a frischen Wort von Rebbe? Do you want to hear a fresh word, a fresh insight from the Rebbe, referring to his father-in-law, the Rebbe Rayatz? As we say, fresh out of the oven, and they say Havada, of course. And the Ramash, who would later become the Lubavitcher Rebbe, says, I'll share it with you. He says, into 770 come in all types of Jews. 1943. Once in a while there come here Jews who used to be religious on the other side of the ocean. They came to America. They threw the tefillin into the Atlantic. The kids went to public schools. There was no infrastructure of education. And they lost their touch. No Shabbos, no Kashrus, no Chinuch Habonim, no Torah, no Yerushalayim. No kashrus anymore. No taras hamishpacha. They come in once in a while for, you come to a kaddish, a yortzeit. You come in. Ich hab a minig. I have a custom. Ich bin sehr warm zu sei. I embrace them warmly. I greet them. I welcome them. I connect to them. And I encourage them. Und se da ältere Chassidim. There are older Chabad Lubavitcher Chassidim who tell me, this is a chutzpah. This is a disgrace. You're giving a hechsher to their Chilul Shabbos. The Lubavitcher Rebbe's son-in-law is nice to them. What does that mean? They're wonderful Jews. They could drive on Shabbos. They don't have to eat kosher. They could keep the stores open on Shabbos. You're giving a hechsher. What should I do? I said. Throw them out. Be rude. Be harsh. Don't be nice. Tell them the truth. The Rebbe says to them, "Bei mir ist euch gekommen anders." I thought differently, but I didn't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Bin ich heint aruf zum Rebbe. So today I went up to the Rebbe, my father-in-law, zum Schwer. He said zum Schwer to my father-in-law, and I told him the question. I said, "I'm Makar of these Jews. Older Chassidim told me I'm wrong. Frag ich beim Schwer, frag ich beim Rebbe, and I'm asking the Rebbe, what's the right thing to do?" And the Ramash, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, says, this is what the Rebbe told me. And he said it in Yiddish, and Reb David Edelman told it over to me, hearing it directly from the Rebbe in 43, Tovshin Gimel. He said, my father-in-law told me, when parents have a child, the Rebbeinu Shalom made that their love to this child is absolute and infinite. You would think there's no more room in the heart for love. But when they have a second child, there is room for love again, which is infinite. You would think at this point, it's filled to the top. They have another child, and the heart expands yet infinitely again with overflowing love to the child. And with each child, the heart opens up and becomes a conduit for more and more infinite, endless love. Und danach werd geboren a Kind. And then sometimes a child is born. And the child may be suffering an illness. The child may be experiencing disability. The child may have a physical or neurological, physiological condition with serious limits. And the Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, looks up at his son-in-law. You ever saw pictures of the Friedrich Rebbe, the Rayatz, Malach Elakim. He looks up at his son-in-law, and Rabbi David says, I'm going to say this in the words in Yiddish. He says, für dem Kind haben sie an eigenartige Liebschaft. For this child, they have something special of a love. Because the pain, because the difficulties of this child, there's so much empathy. There's so much compassion. They don't love this child less. You can even love a child more, this is the child they love even more. The first children they love infinitely, emes. But this child they love even more infinitely. He says, the Rebbe looked at me and he said, Der Eibishter hat lieb jede Eid wie an eigenem Kind. Hashem loves every Jew infinitely like you love your child. Aber wenn sie da Eid, was sie fällt bei ihm in Tfilin. There's a Jew who's missing in Tfilin. Felt a cheppes in the hand. There's an infection, there's a spiritual challenge in his arm. Ayid was getting his kind's docke, felt in the hand. He said a Jew doesn't learn Torah, a Jew doesn't daven, a Jew doesn't have other mitzvahs. He went through different limbs of the body. There's a challenge. The soul is hurting because a Jew is one with Hashem. The soul is hurting in a deep place. There's a spiritual or emotional wound and trauma that this child, this Jew is experiencing. He says, "For a Zayid hat der Eibishter an eigenartige Liebschaft." For such a Jew, he has a unique love. And the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, looks up at his son-in-law, the future Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he says, "Du für sich wie der Eibishter." You behave like Hashem. Love every Jew. Love every Jew. No. With every fiber of your being. But when you see a Jew struggling, you love him or her even more. They're driving back from Lakewood from the Chasana. She's feeling guilty that they spent so much money on this wedding, completely not reflecting their standards, to put it mildly. And as she puts on this shiur, this is the story she hears. As I'm standing in her home, she says, you gave us back our soul, our life. I felt so proud with my decision. I realized this was exactly what I needed to hear on the way home from the wedding. It was that ultimate validation. And you're here today. I thought I should call him, but you probably get 100 calls, 1,000 calls. You don't need another call, but you're here. And the wedding was just recently. I can't not say thank you. I look at her, I said, I didn't really do anything. I was sound asleep. 2:30 in the morning, nobody wakes me up besides Kesher Nafshi, okay? And every other Shabbaton. I said, but I'm grateful that I was the conduit. Ana Hashem, ki ani avdecha. And then I say, wow, which night was this? Which night was this? So she says, oh, it was February 5th. Remember, it's right before Corona. February 5th. Like, February 5th. Why is that day? I think I had an event that day. I was up. I was up 2:30 in the morning. February 5th. Let me look at the calendar. I look at the calendar. It was just a few weeks before that. It was Yud Shvat. That's the yard site of the Rebbe Rayatz. I say, wow, the chasana was on Yud Shvat. You were coming home as I was farbringing just a few blocks away with the Chevra on Forshay in the tent, 24 Shey. We had a huge oilam. And you were driving back and you heard me share this story. In fact, I shared the story in the tent. I shared the story in the tent. And before I shared the story, I said to myself, you know how Jews always say, you said it already last time, right? That's like the favorite feedback for a speech, right? You said it already. Thank you. Brilliant. You said it already. You said it already. That story, I said it already, right? No? Men, you could say, yeah. Okay, thank you. So I'm thinking, but sometimes I think, should I say, I said the story. It's the story she heard, Yud Shvat, the day of the Chasana. And then she looks at me and she starts crying. I say, why are you crying? She says, let me tell you another part of the story that I wouldn't have known to connect without what you just told me. And she says, you know, I grew up as a secular Jew. My father's name was Josh Zwatsky. A typical Jew, America, 1933, he was born. In the Treifene Medina, both his parents died very, very young. He was an orphan. He was raised by his uncle and aunt. So they weren't even raising their own child. And they needed to give him some education. So they sent him to some type of basic Jewish school in Brooklyn. And he got a little bit of a Jewish education. And at the age of 11, somebody took him in to the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Rebbe Rayatz, for a Yechidus, 1948. My father, Josh, at the time, was 1944. My father, Josh, was 11 years old. And the Rebbe Rayatz looked at him, kleine Yingele, and he said, Ich will dir geben a bracha. I want to give you a blessing. This is a difficult country. Aber du wirst haben jüdische Nachas von deinen Kindern, von deiner Eneklach, lichtike jüdische Deures. You're going to produce beautiful generations of proud, inspired Jews. Now, I meet 11-year-olds all the time. I really don't talk about their marriages, their future. It's not the conversation with an 11-year-old, 20-year-old, a 30-year-old. But that's what the Rebbe said. Very soon, like most American Jews of the 1940s, he left Yiddishkeit. He moved to San Diego. San Diego was the quintessential spiritual Jewish desert in the United States of America in the 1940s and 50s. He went into the beauty supply business. He had a successful business. He married a secular Jewish woman, but a Jewish woman. And they had 2 beautiful little girls. They were given secular names, but they also had 2 Jewish names, Shendel and Dvoira. Life goes on. It's a secular, classic, West Coast, California, Jewish home. The father who still remembers Abisala, Afin Pripitschik, brennt a fire roh, und in Stub is heiß, und der Rebbe mit die kleine Kinder lach, lernen alle Rebbe's, and that's where it ended. Zogtje Kinder lach. And one day, the 1970s, a weird rabbi lands in San Diego. A Chabad shliach lands in San Diego. And he opens a Chabad house. And who does he bump into? Josh Zawatsky. Who are you? Chabad, Lubavitch. I was by the Lubavitch Rebbe in 1944. Come to shul. For Yartzeit, I'll come to shul. Comes for Yartzeit to say Kaddish. He likes the rabbi, likes the kugel, likes the Rebbitzins gefilte fish, soup, ambiance. He likes it. Comes another Yartzeit, another Yartzeit. Why don't you come Shabbos? We have a great time here. It's great. I'm not into the religious thing. Come to shul if they're into the religious thing. Nobody is into the religious thing. Who comes to shul for religion? You know anybody? Yeah, Shimon is doing shul anonymous. Who comes to shul for religion? He starts coming to shul. He loves the rabbi. It triggers something in him. He comes home. He has teenage girls, California Jewish secular girls. Shendel, come to shul. What do I have with the synagogue? It's a great place. He nudges his daughters to come with him to the Chabad synagogue in San Diego. Finally, just to appease their father, who was a nice guy, they came. They heard a class. It touched them. She tells me, I was going every weekend to disco with my friends. And when I was listening to this, I said, this touches me in a deeper place. And I came back the next week and I said, I think I'm going to have to make a choice what type of life I want to live. A life in the disco or a life with more meaning. And after a few months, I said, I want to go learn more of Yiddishkeit. And she and her sister ended up by Rebbitzin Leah Khan in Netzach, which was then in Monsey. And a few years later, she, the daughter of Josh, married her husband Elchanan, who was a musmach from the Mir, from Ney Yisrael in Toronto, a Rav, a Talmud Chacham, a big Talmud Chacham. And they built a beautiful family. And she said, my father saw this. And he said, the Lubavitcher Rebbe knew this in 1944. I think I'm going to start keeping Shabbos. And he came back to Yiddishkeit as an old man. And as he saw both of his daughters build Jewish families with grandchildren in the yeshivas, and his nachas was swelling until his passing just 4 years ago. But she says, But there was that one boy, Shmuley, my son, struggling. And I knew in my heart, we have to be close, we have to be connected. And when I felt guilt about the wedding I made, coming home, it was that same person, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Rayatz, who shared with me that empowered message that you never, ever detach from a child. You love that child. You're proud of that child. You empathize with that child. You go on the journey with that child. You connect with that child. You feel that child. This is what she tells me that night as I was trying to get a passport to go to Rostov, where the Rebbe Rayatz became Rebbe after his father's passing in 1920. This is the story the passport lady shared with me today, and I am privileged that Peril Schneider is right here in the crowd with us. The proud mother of Shmuley and his Kala, Rachel, who, and as I spoke to her Friday night, I met her. And she said, "You remember me?" I'm like, give me the hint. I'm a man, give me the hint. She's like, "Passport lady." I said, "Lakewood, wedding, YouTube." It's like, yeah. I said, it's 2 years later. She says, 2 years later, they come to us almost every Shabbos. And I want you to know something, she said. A few weeks ago, Shabbos ended. And I saw that both my son and my daughter-in-law ran to get their phones. And I looked at my husband and I said, they're keeping Shabbos. And you know, you helped me. Because when I see Motzei Shabbos, you know how the Chevra run to get their phones? And I'm like, I'm giving such good Shalosh Shudas Torah. But really, Shendel, I should really say, they're keeping Shabbos. I think that's how Hashem looks at it. Habeit mishamayim urei. 80 years after Hitler, they're keeping Shabbos. They're keeping Shabbos. They didn't have to. Nobody forced them. They're keeping Shabbos. And as I met Shendel here this Shabbos, she says, one missing piece I never told you. I said, what? She said, why at 2 a.m. did I decide you're my therapist? I'm like, beats me. I don't know what Kool-Aid you have been drinking. I don't know what YY flicks you have been watching. I don't know. I don't mix into people's lives. She says, I'll tell you why. 6 years ago, my father, Josh, came for a visit from San Diego to Muncie. She says, I'm a busy mother, a busy lady, raising a family, making passports for Jews who have no patience and have to fly. They already missed their flight. It's a busy life. By day, I'm busy. By night, I'm busy. You know, fit in a Yiddish shtub, we don't have to explain it, at least not to the Ezra's Noshim. And even not to the Ezra's Anash. I'm not I don't go places. I'm not the Shia person. My father was in Muncie. Josh was in Muncie 6 years ago. And he comes home one day and he said, did I hear a rabbi in Muncie? You have to go here, Rabbi YY. So she tells me, Zet wie de Eberste viert der Welt. Trust me, this has nothing to do with me. I slept through this whole story. I'm just here to share it. Ono Hashem, ki ani avdecha. Every soul has a journey. Every soul is accounted for. Every soul is infinitely priceless. Every soul is a piece of Ein Sof. And every soul is running just to come closer.
Enjoyed this story? Come again. Bring a friend. StoriesToInspire.org